Chadwick.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Consumer Affairs and asks, what are his priorities for the Consumer Affairs portfolio?
Honourable John Boscawen.
Mr Speaker, my priority will be to continue the work of my predecessor, particularly the significant work already underway to rationalise consumer legislation as part of the One Law, One Door programme. Last night I received a briefing from my officials in the Ministry of Consumer Affairs, and I'll be considering the matters raised over the next few days.
Chauvel.
Thank you, sir. Does the Minister stand by his statement that, quote, the emissions trading scheme is already set to impose a significant cost burden on New Zealand households, a burden that may become crippling if opportunistic companies take advantage of the situation to inflate their profit margins? If so, will one of his priorities as Minister of Consumer Affairs be protecting consumers from opportunistic ETS pricing? If not, why not?
The Honourable John Boscawen.
Mr Speaker, the Minister of Consumer Affairs has never made that statement.
Charles Chauvel. Order. 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 Now I say to the Honourable Dr Nick Smith that, and the Honourable David Parker, that I've been on my feet for some time, and I'm not that little. The members should be able to see that I'm on my feet. Now, Charles Chauvel has the floor for a supplementary question, and that noise was just totally out of... for point of order, I'll hear the Honourable Rodney Hyde.
Mr Speaker, it's a requirement under standing orders that questions be true. You can't ask a false question. Now, what the member did was say, does he stand by the statement? In fact, the Minister of Consumer Affairs had never made that statement.
Order. The point of order is totally unnecessary. The Minister said that. And that was a perfectly good answer. Charles Chauvel, supplementary
point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, Charles Chauvel.
Sir, I want to just draw your attention to the particular wording of the question. I asked the Minister whether he stood by his statement. There's no doubt that he made the statement.
Order. The member will resume his seat. Ministers are not responsible for statements made previously by anyone other than the Minister. And the member's been in this House long enough to know that. The Minister answered perfectly properly that the Minister of Consumer Affairs had not made that statement. Someone else of the same name as that person may have, but that's irrelevant.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
That's irrelevant.
Sorry, point of order, Mr
The Honourable Darren Hughes.
Speaker, it's an interesting point that you raised with the House. Is it in order for a member to say, does he agree with the statement of, and then name the Member of Parliament that might have said it before, and will those comments be influencing a ministerial policy agenda that the Minister's officials were briefing him on last night, even if the Member of Parliament being referred to is the same person as the Minister? Presumably that would be in order if you were asked, if the Minister was asked, do you agree with the comments of Gerry Brownlee or whoever it happens to be?
Oh, no, look, we don't need to debate this matter further by way of point of order. It's a very simple matter. The question can be asked, indeed. Ministers can be asked if they agree with other statements, but in terms of the precision of any answer that might be, achieved, ministers aren't responsible for statements made by other people. And so I can't really insist on any particular answer. The question can certainly be asked. The standing orders have been relaxed to allow that, but in terms of the precision of any answer gained, often those questions don't really elicit much by way of answers. Charles Chauvel, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister agree with the view expressed by John Boscawen MP in May 2010 that, quote, the ETS should be scrapped or delayed, but if the government is dead set on imposing this ridiculous...
Point of order, the Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, long-standing convention of the House is about ministerial responsibility. Be very plain if Mr Chauvel's got concerns about the emissions trading scheme or issues with respect to it. It's very clearly in my responsibility, not the responsibility of the Minister of Consumer Affairs.
Order. No, I listened very carefully to the previous supplementary question, and while the answer given to it was perfectly in order, I was listening carefully because initially I got the same impression as the Honourable Minister did, that how could this be a matter, the responsibility of the Minister of Consumer Affairs, but then the questioner did link it into the responsibilities of the Minister of Consumer Affairs in terms of impact on retailer retail pricing and consumers' interest in that, and I believe that's a legitimate area of interest of the Minister of Consumer Affairs. The Minister's answer was perfectly in order. Now the member is asking the Minister whether he agrees with a statement made by a person, and that's a perfectly in order question. I invite Charles Chauvel to start his question again.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Does the Minister agree with the statement made in May 2010 by John Boscawen MP that, quote, the ETS should be scrapped or delayed, but if the government is dead set on imposing this ridiculous tax on the country, then New Zealanders should be told exactly how it will affect their lives, end quote? And if so, will one of his priorities as Minister for Consumer Affairs be telling New Zealanders exactly how the ETS will affect their lives? And if not, why not?
The Honourable John Boscawen. Point of order, the Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, if that is going to be included within the portfolio responsibility of the Minister of Consumer Affairs, frankly there's not a single question with respect to transport or finance or justice or anything that would fall into his responsibilities. The reality is if there are issues with respect to pricing and the emissions trading scheme, Mr Chauvel is perfectly free to put a question down to myself as the responsible government minister.
Order. No, I don't need further assistance on this matter. It's not up to other ministers to claim that the area is their area. It's up to the minister being questioned to determine it's not his responsibility. Now, when it comes to consumer prices, it's not me to judge. The Minister of Consumer Affairs is the one to judge whether or not he has responsibility in that area. John Boscawen. The Honourable John Boscawen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And as the Minister of Consumer Affairs, I can tell the member I'm considering the advice on this issue. I had, as I say, a briefing with my officials last night, and I look forward to working with them on my priorities. But, sir, as a member of the ACT Party, I absolutely agree with the statements made by John Boscawen last May as quoted by the member.
The Minister's not responsible for anything a member of the ACT Party may have said. Charles... Order. I fear that was a fellow Northlander making that interjection. I feel somewhat embarrassed that a fellow Northlander could make such noises. I invite the House to come back to it. Charles Chauvel. Supplementary question, Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, of the two following statements about the effect on consumers of the emissions trading scheme, which does he say consumers should believe? One, John Boscawen's statement that, quote, the ETS will have a profound impact on our economy, raising prices across the board, end quote. Or two, the Prime Minister's response to one of his recent questions that, quote, there will be no impact on prices as a result of the emissions trading scheme and the member should stop making it up.
The Honourable John Boscawen.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. There are clearly different views on the emissions trading scheme. And I look forward to taking advice from my officials and making future statements on this issue as they and I deem appropriate. Thank you, Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Gerry Brownlee, point of order. A point of order has been called.
Mr Speaker, I accept that you have properly ruled that if there are matters that the Minister considers to be his responsibility, then he should answer them. But it's also a responsibility, I think, to ensure, there is a responsibility to ensure that questions are appropriately addressed to ministers. In that case, the Minister of Consumer Affairs was asked to arbitrate between two opinions taken by two different people. Now, I don't know how that particularly assists firstly consumers, but secondly how it goes to his responsibility. He has no responsibility for any statements other than those statements as Minister.
Order. I don't need to hear anything further on the matter. The question, though, was framed in relation to the impact on consumers, and that's why I didn't intervene in the question. It seemed to me reasonable to address the Minister of Consumer Affairs a matter that related to consumers. However, because it asked him to compare two statements or comment on two statements by people for whom he is not responsible as Minister, then I would not insist on any particular answer. And so the Minister's answer was perfectly adequate in dealing with the question. because he isn't, as you point out, as the Honourable Gerry Brownlee points out, he's not responsible for what either John Boscawen might have said or what the Prime Minister might have said. He is the Minister of Consumer Affairs.